Conduct of Life. Conduct of Life was published in 1860. Most of the material in this book has served as a course of lecture, first in Pittsburgh in 1851, later in Boston, and then at various places throughout the country. By this time, Emerson was well known everywhere in America and was in constant demand. He was traveling extensively in the East and in the Middle West, which was then a raw and growing part of the country. The period between his return from England in 1848 and the publication of this book in 1860 was full of great political unrest, and Emerson was unwillingly drawn into it. Conduct of Life was well received and sold rapidly. Selected for this volume are the essays Wealth and Culture. Wealth. Who shall tell what did befall, far away in time, when once over the lifeless ball hung idle stars and suns? What god the element obeyed? Wings of what wind the lichen bore, wafting the puny seeds of power, which lodged in rock, the rock abrade. And well the primal pioneer knew the strong task to it assigned, patient through heaven's enormous year, to build in matter home for mind. From air the creeping centuries drew the matted thicket low and wide. This must the leaves of age strew. The fuck? Throughout the country. At this time, Emerson was well known. To build in matter home for mind, from air the creeping centuries drew the matted thicket low and wide. This must the leaves of ages strew, the granite slab to cloth and hide, ere wheat can wave its golden pride. What smiths and in what furnace rolled in dizzy eons dim and mute, the reeling brain can ill compute. Copper and iron, lead and gold, what oldest star the fame can save of races perishing to pave the planet with a floor of lime? Dust in their pyramid and mole, who saw what ferns and palms were pressed under the tumbling mountain's breast, in the safe herbal of the coal. But when the quarried means were piled, all is waste and worthless, till arrives the wise selecting will, and out of slime and chaos wit draws the threads of fair and fit. Then temples rose, and towns, and marts, the shop of toil, the hall of arts. Then flew the sail across the seas, to feed the north from tropics trees. The storm wind wove, the torrent span, where they were bid the rivers ran. New slaves fulfilled the poet's dream. Galvanic wire, strong-shouldered steam. Then docks were built, and crops were stored, and ingots added to the hoard. But though light-headed man forget, remembering matter pays her debt, still through her motes and masses draw electric thrills and ties of law, which bind the strengths of nature wild to the conscience of a child. As soon as a stranger is introduced into any company, one of the first questions which all wish to have answered is, how does that man get his living? And with reason. He is no whole man until he knows how to earn a blameless livelihood. Society is barbarous until every industrious man can get his living without dishonest customs. Every man is a consumer and ought to be a producer. He fails to make his place good in the world unless he not only pays his debt, but also adds something to the commonwealth. Nor can he do justice to his genius without making some larger demand on the world than a bare subsistence. He is by constitution expensive and needs to be rich. Wealth has its own source in applications of the mind to nature, from the rudest strokes of spade and axe up to the last secrets of art. Intimate ties subsist between thought and all production, because a better order is equivalent to vast amounts of brute labor. The forces and the resistances are nature's, but the mind acts in bringing things from where they abound to where they are wanted, in wise combining, in directing the practice of the useful arts, and in the creation of finer values by fine art, by eloquence, by song, or the reproductions of memory. Wealth is in applications of mind to nature, and the art of getting rich consists not in industry, much less in saving, but in a better order, in timeliness, in being at the right spot. One man has stronger arms or longer legs. Another sees by the course of streams and growth of markets where land will be wanted, makes a clearing to the river, goes to sleep, and wakes up rich. Steam is no stronger now than it was 100 years ago, but is put to better use. A clever fellow was acquainted with the expansive force of steam. He also saw the wealth of heat and grass rotting in Michigan. Then he cunningly screws on the steam pipe to the wheat crop. Puff now, O steam. The steam puffs and expands as before, but this time it is dragging all Michigan at its back to hungry New York and hungry England. Coal lay in ledges under the ground since the flood, until a laborer with pick and windlass brings it to the surface. We may well call it black diamonds. Every basket is power and civilization. For coal is a portable climate. It carries the heat of the tropics to Labrador and the polar circle, and it is the means of transporting itself whithersoever it is wanted. Watt and Stevenson whispered in the ear of mankind their secret, that a half ounce of coal will draw 2 tons a mile. And coal carries coal, by rail and by boat, to make Canada as warm as Calcutta, and with its comfort brings its industrial power. When the farmer's peaches are taken from under the tree and carried into town, they have a new look and a hundredfold value over the fruit which grew on the same bough and lies fulsomely on the ground. The craft of the merchant is this bringing a thing from where it abounds to where it is costly. Wealth begins in a tight roof and keeps the rain and wind out, in a good pump that yields you plenty of sweet water, and 2 suits of cloths, so to change your dress when you are wet, and dry sticks to burn, and a good double wick lamp, and 3 meals, and a horse or a locomotive to cross the land, and a boat to cross the sea, and tools to work with, and books to read. And so in giving on all sides by tools and auxiliaries the greatest possible extension to our powers, as if it added feet and hands and eyes and blood, length to the day, and knowledge and goodwill. Wealth begins with these articles of necessity. And here we must recite the iron law which nature thunders in these northern climates. First, she requires that each man should feed himself. If haply his fathers have left him no inheritance, he must go to work, and by making his wants less or his gains more, he must draw himself out of that state of pain and insult in which she forces the beggar to lie. She gives him no rest until this is done. She starves, taunts, and torments him, takes away warmth, laughter, sleep, friends, and daylight, until he has fought his way to his own loaf. Then, less peremptorily, but still with sting enough, she urges him to the acquisition of such things as belong to him. Every warehouse and shop window, every fruit tree, every thought of every hour opens a new want to him, which it concerns his power and dignity to gratify. It is of no use to argue the wants down. The philosophers have laid the greatness of man in making his wants few. But will a man content himself with a hut and a handful of dried peas? He is born to be rich. He is thoroughly related, and is tempted out by his appetites and fancies to the conquest of this and that piece of nature. Until he finds his well-being in the use of his planet and of more planets than his own. Wealth requires, besides the crust of bread and the roof, the freedom of the city, the freedom of the earth, traveling machinery, the benefits of science, music, and fine arts, the best culture, and the best company. He is the rich man who can avail himself of all men's faculties. He is the richest man who knows how to draw a benefit from the labors of the greatest number of men in distant countries and in past times. The same correspondence that is between thirst in the stomach and water in the spring exists between the whole of man and the whole of nature. The elements offer their service to him. The sea, washing the equator and the poles, offers its perilous aid, and the power and empire that follow it, day by day, to his craft and audacity. Beware of me, it says, but if you can hold me, I am the key to all the lands. Fire offers, on its side, an equal power. Fire, steam, lightning, gravity, ledges of rock, mines of iron, lead, quicksilver, tin, and gold, forests of all woods, fruits of all climates, animals of all habits, the powers of tillage, the fabrics of his chemic laboratory. The webs of his loom, the masculine drought of his locomotive, the talismans of the machine shop, all grand and subtle things. Minerals, gases, ethers, passions, war, trade, government are his natural playmates, and according to the excellence of the machinery in each human being is his attraction for the instruments he is to employ. The world is his tool chest, and he is successful, or his education is carried on just so far, as is the marriage of his faculties with nature, or the degree in which he takes up things into himself. The strong race is strong on these terms. The Saxons are the merchants of the world, now, for 1,000 years, the leading race, and by nothing more than their quality of personal independence, and in its special modification, pecuniary independence. No reliance for bread and games on the government, no clanship, no patriarchal style of living by the revenues of a chief, no marrying on, no system of clientship suits them, but every man must pay his scot. The English are prosperous and peaceable, with their habit of considering that every man must take care of himself, and has himself to thank if he do not maintain and improve his position in society. The subject of economy mixes itself with morals, inasmuch as it is a peremptory point of virtue that a man's independence be secured. Poverty demoralizes. A man in debt is so far a slave, and Wall Street thinks it easy for a millionaire to be a man of his word, a man of honor, but that in failing circumstances no man can be relied on to keep his integrity. And when one observes in the hotels and places of our Atlantic capitals the habit of expense, the riot of the senses, the absence of bonds, clanship, fellow feeling of any kind, he feels that when a man or a woman is driven to the wall, the chances of integrity are frightfully diminished, as if virtue were coming to be a luxury, which few could afford, or as Burke said, at a market almost too high for humanity. He may fix his inventory of necessities and of enjoyments on what scale he pleases, but if he wishes the power and privilege of thought, the chalking out of his own career, and having society on his terms, he must bring his wants within his proper power to satisfy. The manly part is to do with might and main what you can do. The world is full of fops who never did anything and who had persuaded beauties and men of genius to wear their fop livery, and these will deliver the fop opinion that it is not respectable to be seen earning a living, that it is much more respectable to spend without earning. And this doctrine of the snake will come also from the elect sons of light. For wise men are not wise at all hours, and will speak 5 times from their taste, or their humor, to once from their reason. The brave workman, who might betray his feeling of it in his manners, if he do not succumb to his practice, must replace the grace or elegance forfeited by the merit of the work done, no matter whether he makes shoes or statues or laws. It is the privilege of any human work which is well done to invest the doer with a certain haughtiness. He can well afford not to conciliate, whose faithful work will answer for him. The mechanic at his bench carries a quiet heart and assured manners, and deals on even terms with men of any condition. The artist has made his picture so true that it disconcerts criticism. The statue is so beautiful that it contracts no stain from the market. but makes the market a silent gallery for itself. The case of the young lawyer was pitiful to discuss, a paltry matter of buttons or tweezer cases, but the determined youth saw in it an aperture to insert his dangerous wedges, made the insignificance of the thing forgotten, and gave fame by his sense and energy to the name and affairs of the Tittleton snuff-box factory. Society in large towns is babyish, and wealth is made a toy. A life of pleasure is so ostentatious that a shallow observer must believe that this is the agreed best use of wealth, and whatever is pretended it ends in cosseting. But if this were the main use of surplus capital, it would bring us to barricades, burned towns, and tomahawks presently. Men of sense esteem wealth to be the assimilation of nature to themselves, the converting of the sap and juices of the planet to the incarnation and nutriment of their design. Power is what they want, not candy. Power to execute their design. Power to give legs and feet, form and actuality to their thought, which to a clear-sighted man appears the end for which the universe exists, and all its resources might be well applied. Columbus thinks that the sphere is a problem for practical navigation as well as for closet geometry, and looks on all kings and peoples as cowardly landsmen until they dare fit him out. Few men on the planet have more truly belonged to it, but he was forced to leave much of his map blank. His successors inherited his map and inherited his fury to complete it. So the men of the mine, telegraph, mill, map, and survey, the monomaniacs who talk up their project in marts and offices and entreat men to subscribe, how did our factories get built? How did North America get netted with iron rails, except by the importunity of these orators who dragged all the prudent men in? Is party the madness of many for the gain of a few? This speculative genius is the madness of a few for the gain of the world. The projectors are sacrificed, but the public is the gainer. Each of these idealists, working after his thought, would make it tyrannical if he could. He is met and antagonized by other speculators as hot as he. The equilibrium is preserved by these counteractions, as one tree keeps down another in the forest that it may not absorb all the sap in the ground. And the supply and nature of railroad presidents, copper miners, grand junctioners, smoke burners, fire annihilators, etc., is limited by the same law which keeps the proportion in the supply of carbon, of alum, and of hydrogen. To be rich is to have a ticket of admission to the master works and chief men of each race. It is to have the sea, by voyaging to visit the mountains, Niagara, the Nile, the desert, Rome, Paris, Constantinople, to see galleries, libraries, arsenals, manufactories, The reader of Humboldt's Cosmos follows the marches of a man whose eyes, ears, and mind are armed by all the science, arts, and implements which mankind have anywhere accumulated, and who is using these to add to the stock. So it is with Denon, Beckford, Belzoni, Wilkinson, Layard, Kane, Lepsius, and Livingston. The rich man, says Sadie, is everywhere expected and at home. The rich take up something more of the world into man's life. They include the country as well as the town, the ocean side, the white hills, the far west, and the old European homesteads of man in their notion of available material. The world is his who has money to go over it. He arrives at the seashore, and a sumptuous ship has floored and carpeted for him the stormy Atlantic, and made it a luxurious hotel amid the horrors of tempests. The Persians say, "It is the same to him who wears a shoe, as if the whole earth were covered with leather." Kings are said to have long arms, but every man should have long arms, and should pluck his living, his instruments, his power, and his knowing from the sun, moons, and stars. Is not then the demand to be rich legitimate? Yet I have never seen a rich man. I have never seen a man as rich as all men ought to be, or with an adequate command of nature. The pulpit and the press have many commonplaces denouncing the thirst for wealth. But if men should take these moralists at their word and leave off aiming to be rich, the moralists would rush to rekindle at all hazards this love of power in the people, lest civilization should be undone. Men are urged by their ideas to acquire the command over nature. Ages derive a culture from the wealth of Roman Caesars. Leo X's magnificent kings of France, Grand Dukes of Tuscany, Dukes of Devonshire, Townleys, Vernons, and Peels in England, or whatever great proprietors. It is the interest of all men that there should be Vaticans and Louvres full of noble works of art, British museums and French gardens of plants, Philadelphia academies of natural history, Bodleian, Ambrosian, Royal, Congressional libraries. It is the interest of all that there should be exploring expeditions, Captain Cook's to voyage round the world, Ross's, Franklin's, Richardson's, and Kane's to find the magnetic and the geographic poles. We are all richer for the measurement of a degree of latitude on the Earth's surface. Our navigation is safer for the chart. How intimately our knowledge of the system of the universe rests on that, and a true economy in a state or an individual will forget its frugality in behalf of claims like these. Whilst it is each man's interest that not only ease and convenience of living, but also wealth or surplus product should exist somewhere, it need not be in his hands. Often it is very undesirable to him. Goethe said well, "Nobody should be rich, but those who understand it." Some men are born to own and can animate all their possessions. Others cannot. Their owning is not graceful, seems to be a compromise of their character. They seem to steal their own dividends. They should own who can administer, not they who hoard and conceal, not they who, the greater proprietors they are only the greater beggars, but they whose work carves out work for more, opens a path for all. For he is the rich man, in whom the people are rich, and he is the poor man, in whom the people are poor. And how to give all access to the masterpieces of art and nature is the problem of civilization. The socialism of our day has done good service in setting men on thinking how certain civilizing benefits, now only enjoyed by the opulent, can be enjoyed by all. For example, the providing to each man the means and apparatus of science and of the arts. There are many articles good for occasional use, which few men are able to own. Every man wishes to see the ring of Saturn, the satellites and belts of Jupiter and Mars, the mountains and craters in the moon. Yet how few can buy a telescope? And of those, scarcely one would like the trouble of keeping it in order and exhibiting it. So of electrical and chemical apparatus, and many the like things. Every man may have occasion to consult books which he does not care to possess, such as cyclopedias, dictionaries, tables, charts, maps, and other public documents, pictures also of birds, beasts, fishes, shells, trees, flowers, whose names he desires to know. There is a refining influence from the arts of design on a prepared mind, which is as positive as that of music, and not to be supplied from any other source. But pictures, engravings, statues, and casts, beside their first cost, entail expenses, as of galleries and keepers of the exhibition, and the use which any man can make of them is rare, and their value, too, is much enhanced by the numbers of men who can share their enjoyment. In the Greek cities, it was reckoned profane that any person should pretend a property in a work of art, which belonged to all who could behold it. I think sometimes, could I only have music on my own terms, could I live in a great city and know where I could go whenever I wish, the ablution and inundation of musical waves that were a bath and a medicine. If properties of this kind were owned by states, towns, and lyceums, they would draw the bonds of neighborhood closer. A town would exist to an intellectual purpose. In Europe, where the feudal forms secure the permanence of wealth in certain families, whose families buy and preserve these things and lay them open to the public. But in America, where democratic institutions divide every estate into small portions after a few years, the public should step into the place of these proprietors and provide this culture and inspiration for the citizens. Man was born to be rich, or inevitably grows rich by the use of his faculties, by the union of thought with nature. Property is an intellectual production. The game requires coolness, right reasoning, promptness, and patience in the players. Cultivated labor drives out brute labor. An infinite number of shrewd men in infinite years have arrived at certain best and shortest ways of doing, and this accumulated skill in arts, cultures, harvestings, curings, manufactures, navigations, exchanges, constitutes the worth of our world today. Commerce is a game of skill, which every man cannot play, which few men can play well. The right merchant is one who has the just average of faculties we call common sense, a man of strong affinity for facts, who makes up his decision on what he has seen. He is thoroughly persuaded of the truths of arithmetic. There is always a reason in the man for his good or bad fortune, and so in making money. Men talk as if there were some magic about this, and believe in magic in all parts of life. He knows that all goes on the old road, pound for pound, cent for cent, for every effect a perfect cause, and that good luck is another name for tenacity of purpose. He insures himself in every transaction and likes small and sure gains. Probity and closeness to the facts are the basis, but the masters of the art add certain long arithmetic. The problem is to combine many and remote operations with the accuracy and adherence to the facts, which is easy in near and small transactions. So to arrive at gigantic results without any compromise of safety. Napoleon was fond of telling the story of the Marseillese banker who said to his visitor, surprised at the contrast between the splendor of the banker's chateau and hospitality and the meanness of the counting room in which he had seen him, "Young man, you are too young to understand how masses are formed. The true and only power, whether composed of money, water, or men, it is all alike. A mass is an immense center of motion, but it must be begun. It must be kept up." And he might have added that the way in which it must be begun and kept up is by obedience to the laws of particles. Success consists in close appliance to the laws of the world, and since those laws are intellectual and moral obedience, and intellectual and moral obedience. Political economy is as good a book wherein to read the life of man and the ascendancy of laws over all private and hostile influences as any Bible which has come down to us. Money is representative and follows the nature and fortunes of the owner. The coin is a delicate meter of civil, social, and moral changes. The farmer is covetous of his dollar, and with reason. It is no waif to him. He knows how many strokes of labor it represents. His bones ache with the day's work that earned it. He knows how much land it represents, how much rain, frost, and sunshine. He knows that in the dollar he gives you so much discretion and patience, so much hoeing and threshing. Try to lift his dollar, you must lift all that weight. In the city where money follows the skit of a pin or a lucky rise in exchange, it comes to be looked on as light. I wish the farmer held it dearer and would spend it only for real bread, force for force. The farmer's dollar is heavy, and the clerk's is light and nimble, leaps out of his pocket, jumps on to card and faro tables,